All right, thank you for joining us today. My name is Gordon, and as he said, I'm here representing Interac today with Jeff. So we want to talk a little bit about building your career as an ALT. We understand that a lot of people view ALT work as a kind of a stepping stone into a bigger career or moving on to other opportunities. So we'll talk a little bit about that and a little bit about ourselves. For myself, I started out working in Eikaiwa, and then I moved over to an ALT position and did that for 5 years before moving into my current position as a recruiter for Interac and working in the office environment. And Jeff took a similar role, so I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself.
Yes, hello everybody. Yes, my name is Jeff McFeely. I worked in English teaching in South Korea first for 2 years, and then I came to Japan in 2015 as an ALT, coming from overseas. And then after 3 years in that role, I then continued working with Interac, but in more of a administrative role in a kind of a program called Staff Preparation Program, which I believe Gordon will talk about a little bit later, to help build my administrative skills and things like that. Nowadays, I work more in overseas recruiting and onboarding and welcoming people into the country from overseas to start their career in Japan, basically. Just talking a little bit about the Japanese economy first. So, of course, I think everyone is very familiar with the Japanese economy, the aging population, of course. But on the whole, there's steadily adding jobs to the economy year after year. But despite that, the working age population being what it is, there's more of a demand than there is supply for new workers. And that's why there are positions for foreign nationals who want to work in Japan. And it's the case where larger companies are focused on attracting college graduates a lot. You might know about the Shinsotsu system in Japan. Smaller companies kind of struggle with that a bit, but there is turnover too. We're moving more and more away from the lifetime employment system in Japan, and these days it's much more common for people to enter in during a later stage in their career. So to fill this kind of gap in between, international professionals are needed, but there are some things to look for. So the first thing I want to talk about, though, is maybe a little bit of expectation, adjusting or management. Of course, salary is probably people's first question and first priority when it comes to working in Japan, and that's very understandable. The average starting salary across all industries for college graduates is 217,000 yen per month. Now, that's an entry-level salary, certainly, because in Japan, a lot of times it's more based on your potential rather than the skills that you may have personally, right? So this is, someone who's just starting their career in Japan can expect about this much. Now, if you're in a very specialized industry or a very technical industry, it could certainly be different. But keep in mind, this is the average, so some salaries are going to be lower and some will be higher, too. But it's about this amount. And actually, this is fairly standard for an ALT salary as well, starting out in Japan, once again, because it is entry level. And this number comes from the Japanese government as well. So it's not like, by a selection of information or anything like that. This is the official stance on this topic. So, just keep that in mind when you see salaries around and what your expectations are, especially coming from overseas. And, I think where a lot of people get trapped a little bit is in the exchange rate and how that works. But I think that most people will find that even with this salary, it's certainly livable in Japan. And for someone who's just starting their career, maybe for someone a little bit later in life who has a family to support and such like that, then of course they would expect a higher salary as part of their career. But for someone just entering and starting the career, can expect about this much on average. Now, there are certain skills that have the highest market value in Japan. So, of course, the number one, by and large, is a Japanese skill. Probably, if you have to put a number to it, around the N2 level using the JLPT's qualifications. But it's not. But of course, the JLPT is written. It is based on how well you take the test to an extent. So spoken skills as well are very important. And of course, that's not measured by the JLPT. So you do need to have N2 Japanese, probably your business communication skills in Japanese to be able to work in sort of these other roles that are maybe beyond English teaching or beyond working in education. Working in a Japanese office, you also need some cross-cultural competence, is a way to put it. You do need to be able to work with people probably from lots of different environments. Gordon and I are both from America, but we have colleagues who are from Canada, Jamaica, the Philippines, many different places. And over the years, we've had people from Zimbabwe, the UK, of course, many countries, and so you do need to work not just with the Japanese environment a lot of times, but in an environment with lots of crisscrossing cultures. Now, there's also, of course, a market value for specialized skills, professional skills. So using, your time to develop, in terms of things like coding, of course, is a very popular one, but even other things like website development or graphic design, things like that. There's always lots of ways. And of course, the more specialized and technical, of course, the more potential there is there for that to utilize that. I think what you have to remember, of course, is that when you're a foreign national in another country, not unique to Japan, it's by nature, it's going to be much harder for a company to hire you than someone else that is already established and living there, right? And maybe doesn't have restrictions like visa status or what work they can do, things like that. And so it's not enough just to be a great person. You also have kind of these extra skills in mind so that they have a strong desire to hire you, right? Having said that, though, of course, industry-specific experience is always very good, no matter what field you're in. And working in Japan is always very important. If you can put that you've worked in a Japanese company environment or a Japanese professional environment on your resume, that will give hiring managers and such a lot more confidence in working with your application. In that they know that, okay, when it comes to some of these minutia of Japanese business environments, we'll talk a little bit about here in a few minutes, that you do have some experience there. You've worked in that environment where people are reporting in the way that they do in Japan, and that they're filling out paperwork like you do in Japan, which is a little bit different from a lot of the countries where we come from. Of course, in Japan as well in particular, I think there's a strong emphasis on qualifications. We mentioned N2 at the top, but even things like a driver's license, is something that you would put on a resume in Japan. And then there's lots of courses you can do, lots of individual qualifications you can do. And putting those on your resume really does make a really big help from the perspective of a Japanese hiring manager. Also, a very, very big thing is, of course, immigration status, and this is something unique to us, in Japan, who are foreign nationals living here. If you're on a status of residence that does not require sponsorship, such as like a spouse visa or permanent residence, then it's basically no extra work for a company to hire that person, by and large. There's a little bit, because there's some follow-up they have to do, especially for like a spouse visa, for example. But if your status of residence is something like a student or an instructor, perhaps, if you're working as an ALT, then you do have to keep in mind that they would have to do a little bit of work in terms of sponsoring your visa. It's not a lot, I don't think, but there is a little bit more there, and some companies don't want to take that step, especially if they haven't before. But also, if you're, this is also why it's very important. If you're in Japan on like a tourist visa, for example, a lot of times companies won't work with a candidate at all in that case, because it is such a very difficult situation for them to work with. But there's also the long-term commitment. I mentioned earlier, there's not so much lifetime employment in Japan, or there still is, but it's gradually less and less over time. But there is still a long-term commitment, especially if you're coming from overseas, perhaps, or if companies working a lot to train you up. They will be looking for that, 3, 5 years, 10 years down the line, and seeing what you can also bring to the table as well, what your potential is for that timeline too. And lastly, of course, there's soft skills, and these are especially important in Japan. Things like communication, working as a team, understanding how other people are, following, the company culture too is a really big thing in Japan a lot of the times. So these are just a list. There's of course other skills too, but if you had to, maybe think about your resume, your skill set, what you can do, maybe where you can highlight this as well. So you don't have to have every single thing on this list, I don't think, but you should certainly highlight the ones that you do feel confident in, and do what you can about the others. Okay. Another very important part about working in Japan that's very different from working in a lot of other cultures is this sort of Tetris style and Amoeba style working, concepts. So it's just like the name sounds, all these two very different things, Tetris and Amoeba. But Tetris style, Tetris is very fixed shapes, right? And you line them up, and every shape has its own purpose. And when they're all lined up together, something great happens. Everyone, in Tetris style work, everyone has very clear responsibilities. What you do in your job, it's exactly as in the job description, and that's what you do. And maybe you do a little bit here and there otherwise, but I know my friends in America say like, oh, that's not in my job description. I don't have to do that. I'm not doing it. In Japan, it's much more about kind of this more amoeba style. Now, it's probably not true for every single company, but I would say this is largely true for companies in Japan. But an amoeba style is more where you're maybe you're dabbling in a lot of different areas. You're doing not just your main role, but you're supporting other teammates in their work, and you're not just focused on just your task, but you're helping out others too for the kind of the end goal of whatever that is for your business. You're not helping out in every single department across your company maybe, but your local team members, you're supporting them, right? There's a lot more overlap. It's not just very straight and fixed like it is with an amoeba, or sorry, with a Tetris rather. Okay, and then last part before I'll pass it back to Gordon is there's a concept called HoRenSou. Sorry, it seems to be a little bit messed up in terms of the express ratio there. But there's a concept called HoRenSou. Easy to remember because it's Japanese for spinach. But HoRenSou is report, contact, and consult. Hokoku, Renkoku, Sokoku. So this concept is that in Japan, when you're working on something, you're reporting it as well. And if you're not reporting it, it's basically the same as it not being done. Even if at the end you'll get there and everything is all good, you still have to report the progress and report any issues and be very, very vocal about it. It's just how Japanese business has developed over the years that the managers are expected to know what their team are working on and expected to know how the progress is going. So the expectation for workers as well is that they report it. Some people have trouble adapting to this from Western cultures, perhaps, because in a lot of other cultures, you're just doing your work and doing your work, and that if you didn't do your work, that's when something comes up, right? But in Japan, even if you're doing everything right, you still should report how the progress is going. It's still very much expected. So this is just something to keep in mind. It has to do with the group mentality in Japan, perhaps, and the goal of the team. But for someone who's looking to start their career, keep this HoRenSou concept in mind. And there's a lot of information out there about it, but it's very, very important. So I'll pass it over to Gordon to take it from here for some additional considerations.
Thank you, Jeff. So a few additional considerations when you're looking to make that move from the classroom to a more corporate environment. Something about high context communication. If you've worked as an ALT or if you've worked in a Japanese business, you may have run into this. Typically in Japan, you don't get a lot of direct messages or direct orders about what is expected of you. So for example, as an ALT, you might hear something like, "Oh, on Wednesday, we generally take out the trash." Whereas in the States, where I'm from, someone would probably come in and say, "Hey, it's Wednesday, you need to take the trash out." But what my Japanese teacher is telling me is, "It's Wednesday, everybody takes out the trash. I'm telling you to take out the trash." They won't tell you directly, they'll kind of tell you in a roundabout way. And this is very true in a Japanese company as well. It's very rare that our Japanese managers will tell us directly what is expected of us. And we're expected to kind of read between the lines. And if we're not getting the clear message, it's up to us to go back to the person giving the message and ask for clarification. Another consideration that I think is different than a lot of our home countries is built-in overtime. And this also may not apply to every company, but it is a common practice in a lot of companies. So in your contract, there will be a number of overtime hours included in your contract that you would need to fulfill beyond your regular 40 hours of a work week without any additional salary. So for us, we have built-in overtime, and then beyond that built-in overtime, then we start accruing overtime pay. So it's important to be kind of aware what that buffer is and be prepared to fill up that buffer, especially if it's a busy time for your team. It's not always about your personal schedule or how busy you personally are, but if others in your team are very busy, being able to take that amoeba mindset and help spread the work around and help your teammates so everybody's working together and everybody's working towards a common goal. So it's less of a personal driven thing. It's more of being aware of your group and being aware of your team members as well. Okay, and some other considerations to think about if you're planning to build a career in Japan. It's more of a marathon rather than a sprint. So if you're going to join a company and you're planning on moving up very quickly, you're going to go from entry level to manager over the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to be very difficult. Promotions are usually dependent on the group success, not just your individual success. So if there's a need within the company and the company is doing well, and you've proven that you can take on that role, you may be promoted, but it usually takes several years. It's not an automatic, you're doing a great job, so we're just going to promote you to promote you. Also, when it comes to bonuses, bonuses are also dependent both on the group success and your individual success. So even if you have a really strong quarter, but your team did not have such a strong quarter, that may impact your final bonus as well. I think that's kind of a shock for some people coming from a Western mindset, thinking, well, I met all my goals, I met my KPIs, I did a really great job, but the team didn't meet their KPIs, or the organization didn't meet their KPIs, and that may affect your individual bonus as well. And then also taking on roles before you're actually promoted into that position. Oftentimes you'll be asked in Japanese companies to take on extra work and extra responsibilities that may not match your exact title or position in the company. So you may not be a manager at the time, but you may be asked to join, say, a manager level meeting or take on some of the management of new staff. And that's kind of to prep you for moving into that role. It's very rare that a Japanese company will move someone into a role that they're not 100% confident that person can fulfill. So they'll start giving you some of those responsibilities early on so you can start proving yourself and that you'll be prepared to take on that role when the time comes. Okay, and then as we talked about, as an ALT, it's a chance to sort of build up some of these skills and prepare yourself to move into a corporate role. So as an ALT, typically you're coming in with very entry-level skills, and that's great. It's a chance to use that extra time outside of the classroom to build up some of those other skills that you want to use later on in your career. It's also a great way to get some Japanese work experience. Working with Japanese teachers and working in a Japanese school, it's kind of a microcosm of what it's like to work in a Japanese company, actually. It's a very good sort of introductory to that sort of environment. Cultural literacy building. It's an opportunity to work very closely with Japanese coworkers and build up that cultural literacy and a little bit about what it's like to work with Japanese people. Of course, teamworking and communication skills. You'll be teaching and working very closely with Japanese teachers, so it's a great opportunity to build those skills. Time management skills. You have to keep a very strict time schedule, of course, working in school. Presentation skills, presenting classes to students, of course, helps with those skills. Work-life balance. I think this is one of the main selling points of the ALT position. You have the opportunity outside of work. Usually your day will end at 4 or 4:30 as an ALT, and then you have the evening to work on other things. So if you want to do some additional studying, you want to study Japanese, you want to study programming, things like that, you have that time on the weekends and after your regular work schedule to still do those other things that you're interested in. And then finally, making connections and showing your interests. It's a great way to meet other people. We have a really diverse community within the ALT community, and it's also a great way to meet other people as well, because we have positions all over the country, and you can go out and meet different people and also use your free time outside of working to attend events in the evening or on the weekends like this, where you can kind of get out there and network a little bit. As Jeff mentioned, one of the things that Interac offers kind of in that step is a staff preparation program. This is how Jeff came into his position. It's sort of like a paid internship. Basically, after someone has spent some time with Interac as an ALT, they'll have an opportunity to apply to this program. And then if accepted, you spend about a year in the office learning different roles and taking on different responsibilities within the office. And at the end of that year, they are given the opportunity to apply for a full-time seishain position within the organization. And it's a great way to build up some of those professional skills while still being paid and still keeping your regular position. So it's really a unique opportunity that I think is unique to Interac, and there aren't many other opportunities like this in the ALT industry. And then for our closing advice, I think my biggest advice would be to have a midterm goal and a long-term goal. So think about the next 2 or 3 years, and then think about your 5 or 10-year plan on top of that. And make sure that your short-term or your midterm goal is kind of actively moving you towards that long-term goal. Okay? Use your time wisely, especially if you're working as an ALT. You have lots of free time. You'll have the summer vacation, you'll have the weekends, you'll have time after work. Use that time wisely to build up those skills that you want to apply to a future career. Make sure that you're pacing yourself and don't expect overnight success. Remember, when you make that application, it's an application and an interview process. It doesn't preclude getting that position. So you may have to apply again and again and again until the timing lines up for that position that you've been hoping for. But don't give up. Don't sell yourself short. Continue on. And then finally, also researching and networking and going in with realistic expectations is important. If you know the type of position you want, know what they're looking for, know who they're interviewing, kind of know what that interview process is like, going to networking events, giving out your resume, connecting with people on LinkedIn, And then that kind of leads into the next one, to be tenacious and persistent. So even if it's a no at this point, contact that person again in 3 months and say, hey, do you remember me? Do you have any other positions that might be available now? Or 6 months down the line, I just wanted to check in. I think we spoke a few months ago. Do you have any positions that might be of interest to me, or would you be interested in having lunch or having a coffee? Keeping that constant contact, because one day timing will line up and you'll have that opportunity that you've been looking for. So thank you very much.